welcome back to Cosmic Connections. I'm Starlene Brighter, of course, and I'm here today interviewing Dr. Jean Richey. She is a longtime astrologer and educator with over 45 years of experience in the field. She holds a doctorate in health communication, has taught at the University of Alaska for more than 2 decades, and now brings her passion to vibrational astrology, which is really exciting because I love vibrational astrology. She is one of the speakers at the Fractal Cosmos Conference, and that's why I'm interviewing her today. She will be at the Fractal Cosmos Conference. I'll leave links to everything in the description box. And with that, Jean, thank you so much for being here. I'm glad to have you here.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here with you.
Yeah. It's always nice to talk to people that are into the types of astrology that I am, of course, because vibrational astrology is so different than, the world of astrology itself is so big, right? But research astrology clearly is something you're really excited about. And I love that you're in the world of academia too. So yeah, that's wonderful. So I always start off with a question to ask my guests, because I think this conversation and this question is really exciting and inspirational, especially to new people of astrology. But what was the first thing that got you interested into astrology? What drew you into it? Was there an event?
You'll kind of laugh at this. My mother, when I was 13, she read my chart to me, and it was so right on. I was intrigued, and so I started dabbling with astrology. I think the first book I read was Yoga, Youth, and Reincarnation by Jess Stern. He interviewed Marcia Moore, who was a famous astrologer from Philadelphia. She wrote the book called The Divine Science. I don't know, it's back in the 70s, so people probably don't know about that book, but it's a fantastic book.
Okay, interesting. I don't know that book myself, but that's really interesting. So you've been practicing astrology and studying astrology since the 70s. That's amazing. And your mom was an astrologer. That's pretty fascinating. Your mom was like me as a mom, because I've done that with my kids and grandkids and nieces and nephews, and that's cool. And I'm sure if you have children, you probably were the same way. Yeah.
Well, I was 17 when I read my first astrology book. I mean, I read that the Yoga, Youth, and Reincarnation. That was an interview. But the first book I read was from a British astrologer who's considered the father of astrology, and it was Esoteric Astrology was the name of the book.
Very nice. Okay, I might have heard of that one. I'm not sure. I love books, so I'm a book person. I don't really bother with TV, so books are my thing. So like that's interesting. So what bridged you from your world in education and academia? What bridged you from that into astrology, or was it just something that was always there in the background working, the idea of astrology, or was there a moment, something that bridged you from one to the other?
Well, that's a really good question, because the bridge was I considered myself an astrologer by the time I was 26. So I was reading charts for people when I was in my mid-20s. I studied for 6 years with Stephen Arroyo in Sacramento. I'm sure you're familiar with his name. He wrote the Astrology, Karma, and Transformation. It's a really a wonderful book. So I studied with him for 6 years during my 20s. And then I went, by the end of my 20s, when I had my Saturn return, I was a professional astrologer. So I was working full-time at the DMV in Sacramento, California. And I was also reading charts part-time. I did that for years. And then I also taught astrology to beginners in my early 30s. And then by my late 30s, I felt I needed to move to Alaska. So I did. So I could teach in Alaska at the university.
Oh, wow. So that's awesome. So did you teach astrology at the university or no?
Well, no, Not in my regular professor job. I was a professor of communication, so I taught communication courses. But when I retired out of my position in 2015, I started teaching for Osher Lifelong Learning, which is an adult learning process at the university, and it's on in all different universities across the nation. Osher is. They call it Ollie. And I did teach beginning astrology and intermediate astrology for the last 6 years.
Oh, that's awesome. So are you bringing now, are you still teaching and bringing vibrational astrology, teaching that?
Well, I did in my last class, which just ended a couple months ago. I introduced them to vibrational astrology, and they took to it so fast. I was surprised.
Wow, that's awesome. I love that idea because, I also teach it. I teach it online, but it's great that you're able to share that with your students and be able to, yeah, that's great. Do you think your background in the health communication that shaped the way that you approached astrology, or, assisted in some
Actually,
way?
I think astrology approach actually influenced my job as a professor. I mean, it influenced what I talked about in my classes. I didn't talk about astrology necessarily, but I had a spiritual kind of bent to my teaching.
Oh,
So
that's good
it was
though.
always important to me to understand what makes human beings be who they are.
Yeah, and as a professor, you need to do that. I mean, my favorite professors were the ones that infuse themselves into the subject. So that makes perfect sense that you did that. And I haven't looked at your chart to know, but I'm sure there's something telling in your chart, maybe an isotrap or something that is
For
speaking
my
to that.
for my first my master's degree, the title of my research study had to do with astrology. It was looking at the construction of self in the astrologer and client relationship. That was
Very
my
cool.
master's degree in communication. And
Wow,
my mentors loved that I used astrology as my topic.
that's cool. Yeah, I bet they did because that is wonderful. Wow, that's really interesting. So
And
what
that's a
what
published thesis too, by the way. That thesis and my dissertation are both published.
Oh wow, that's great. Oh my gosh, I love that. And so you are literally bridging the astrology with academia, which I feel is something that needs to be done. I'm a board member of the Cosmobiology Institute. You might know of them, but
Right.
that's one of the things that we're not necessarily working on getting it into universities, but doing the academic level research. So
Hmm.
yeah. Yeah, I figured you knew about CI, so that's really cool. I love that. So, what was it about vibrational astrology specifically that kind of pulled you in? And if I'm not mistaken, that was 2022 that you started getting into vibrational astrology.
Right. Exactly. A friend, one of my students actually turned me
Oh,
on to vibrational astrology, and she went to the conference in Florida. And she didn't know anything about vibrational astrology, but she went to the conference and came back all enthusiastic. And I listened to her and I said, okay, I'll check it out. And, I thought when I first read a few things about it, they were looking at aspects. And well, I knew aspects, so I didn't know what they were talking about other than aspects. And then I soon found out it was the dynamic between the planetary relationships that was so relevant to understanding what makes people tick.
yeah, yeah, I love that. I think that is the spot. So that was what got you interested. That's really cool that the conference, you got it, the
Mm-hmm.
idea from someone in that way. Yeah, the conferences are always fun to do. This one, of course, Fractal Cosmos is online, which will be
Mm.
wonderful. Hopefully, one
Right.
time we'll be able to do it in person, but it's going to be really awesome to get to connect with the people. I was always part of the vibrational astrology conferences too, so it's something that is dear to my heart as well. So What has changed in your perspective of astrology, as in like shifting through the years, since now you're in vibrational astrology? Do you feel like it's more solid, or do you feel like it's more, I don't like to say the word proving astrology or the idea of that, because looking at the whole is what's most important, but has it evolved or something? Has over the years, has that happened in your mind? Maybe that's not the best question.
Well, I have an answer.
You do? Okay.
Vibrational astrology shifted my whole understanding of astrology. Because, well, I knew about midpoints, which is the course I'm going to be teaching at the conference. The talk I'll be giving at the conference is about midpoints and isotraps. I didn't know about isotraps. That was a new concept for me, but I did know midpoints, and I had studied midpoint structures for a long time, and I noted when transits hit midpoints. But what shifted for me was my focus. In fact, the book that I've authored has a focus on the cardinal angles. And so my focus was on looking at people and their cardinal angles as a vortex. That's a very special spot within their chart. And then I found out in vibrational astrology that you can't use the ascendant because of its movement is so fast. We can only use it in the natal chart, which is fine.
Yeah.
I don't use it in the other vibrational charts, but I still think that ascendant's important. But had I studied vibrational astrology before I wrote my book would have been very different.
Yeah.
I wasn't gonna back up and not publish it. I was in the process of publishing it when I started studying vibrational astrology.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that can happen when you come to new information. It's like, okay, the whole perception, kind of the paradigm changes in a way, right?
It was a paradigm shift for me, definitely, because when I look at a chart now, I'm looking for the circuits, which I didn't look at before. I didn't even know I knew the aspects. So if it was in a traditional aspect, I knew that I could talk about those planets involved in the aspect, but I didn't realize that there were the concept of circuits, and it's the circuits that make the energy flow.
Yeah, and that's a big one for me too. Now, once you see it, you can't unsee it. So I agree.
Right, exactly. That's perfectly said.
Yeah, and I studied astrology just on my own until 2012 when I started at Avalon and learned vibrational astrology. And I'm like, oh, I know so much because I've read so many books, and like, you're right.
So you studied with Linda Berry, right?
No, I studied with David Cochran.
Well, I met with David Cochran, but
oh yeah,
she
in
was
her
a student.
class.
Yeah,
we were in the same class together. Yeah. It's great that you're doing that, and so I love that you're now teaching it, and you're going to be presenting at this conference. The talk that you are doing is a workshop on midpoint structures and isotraps. So I know those are not necessarily the mainstream stuff, right? But for someone that's brand new, can you, in just an easy way, tell them what midpoint structures, or the simplest way to describe what an isotrap is?
Well, the midpoint structures it's two planets that are creating a midpoint between themselves, and a third planet sits on top of that, either sits on it by conjunction or sits on the axis by opposition. And that third planet activates the whole dance between the three planets that are involved in the midpoint. Mm-hmm. So it's a sensitive spot in the chart, and we don't always look at midpoints because they're not obvious. You have to have, I would say that you'd have to have a program to print out the midpoints for you, because it's an arduous process to do it mathematically yourself. I did that back in the early 80s. I figured out the midpoints myself because there wasn't a program. There was no astrology program at that time.
Right. Right. Yeah. I don't know when they started coming out with astrology programs, but my first one was
Mid-80s.
yeah, it was probably it was something on like in a book in the CD on the back of the book, like Understanding Astrology, and I really had no idea what I was doing. So when I put it in the computer, I was like, okay, I don't really understand this, but I knew if I wanted to learn that I needed to get something sophisticated. So I did a bunch of research and I came up with Kepler, which is Sirius's like grandbaby or something, you know. So it was like, or grandfather, I should say that, because yeah, Sirius is the newer version, but that's how I ended up digging into astrology on a more serious level. So yeah, that's amazing. It's really cool how now you're sharing the idea of midpoint structures, so the 3 planets, and then the isotraps are when they're connected, right? So that's how you would look at
Well, then
them,
you've got 4 planets involved in a combination. You've got 4 planets, 2 planets at a midpoint, and 2 other planets at a midpoint that share the same midpoint. And so you've got an activation or a resonance of 4 planets, but it makes 6 basic resonances, the isotraps do. And then, of course, if you have a transit or a natal planet sitting on the midpoints, that just enhances the whole process.
Yeah, and so you'll be teaching that at the conference, be able people to learn how to identify them,
how to recognize them. Mm-hmm.
That's
how to
great.
recognize them, and pretty much how to interpret them, basic interpretation.
Yeah, that's great. So was there, and that would be what you would call an isotrap with the 6 planet, well, 2 of them are the same, the 6 planets. Right.
Resonances, yeah.
I should clarify and say the 2 midpoint structures, right, would make the isotrap. So was there an aha moment of that when you were working with isotraps or midpoints, or was it more of like an evolution that you came to, where you were like, oh, this is where I want to dig into? Because, you know, astrology is that vast subject that there's a million places to go. I was just curious, what drew you into that? Was it the early work with the midpoints or something else?
Well, I had always enjoyed working with midpoints. I started using midpoints in my late 20s because the cosmobiology movement was pretty much shared in my classes with Stephen Arroyo. He had people, Ebertine, I can't remember who else it was that was part of that process. I should remember the name, but I don't remember it. But
that's cool,
so I always used it, but I didn't. This is the interesting thing. I didn't realize that it went beyond the 12th vibration or the 12th harmonic, because most programs only did 12. So the Matrix program didn't even do midpoints that I had, and then I had Solar Fire program, and it only did up to 12. So when I started using Sirius, when I started studying vibrational astrology, I realized that there was an infinite amount that the vibrations could be pushed to. So that was a eye opener for me. And then I also noticed that when you're looking at different harmonic charts, sometimes it'll have the same degree as something in your natal chart. And so that intrigued me too. And I understand that Linda Berry is writing a book about the interweavings.
Yes.
I believe she is. I could be wrong on that, but I think she's writing a book about it. And it's fascinating. The idea that kind of resonates from a harmonic chart throughout your natal chart, that it's buried in there. And there's an analogy that Santino uses in his first book, which I just love, is that the natal chart is the face of the clock, and then it tells the time, the time, and it is useful. It's a good tool. But if you open up the face of the clock, you see all the mechanisms and all the dials, and that's the vibrational charts. They're the ones that make the time work. That's how I see it, anyway.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense because it's the function, what's going on underneath the hood, so to speak. So yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, that's awesome. So this is one of the beginner. I'm not using the right word. Foundational tracks that you guys are doing at the conference, right? So this is for
Right.
someone who doesn't know like a whole lot about vibrational astrology, right?
Yeah, the assumption is that the student that would come into my talk would just be basically acquainted with midpoints or not at all.
Okay. So you give them the like, this is what it is. I know it's not hard to explain, but if you don't know, you just don't know. So that's great that this is that Linda decided, or everybody decided, to do a foundational track, because if you're not sure and you're just wanting to learn, it can get over your head very quickly. But this is
Oh
great
yeah.
that you're doing this, and this is going to be something that people can walk away with and like share their experience and look up in their own charts and that sort of thing.
Exactly. And there's one concept that I'll be using in my talk without giving away my whole talk, is that I used an analogy from an engineering context, that the midpoint between two poles, the midpoint between those two poles is a stress point. And they call it, in engineering, they call it the bending stress or the midpoint stress. They actually even use the word midpoint. And so that whole concept at that midpoint or bending stress is the point of expression. If you've got a planet sitting on that midpoint.
Oh, yeah, that's really interesting. The evolutionary astrologers, I've heard them say the midpoint between the two nodes is they call it at the bending. So maybe that's where that comes from.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It comes from an
Yeah.
engineering context. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I've heard like different evolutionary astrologers that probably don't know each other say that. And I'm like, oh, so that's an evolutionary astrology thing. But you saying it now, it's like makes sense, because that's at the middle part. That's very interesting. It'll be exciting to hear what you have to share at the conference about this. So yeah. So I have I'm excited to be able to look at these midpoint structures, be able to learn from you and understand how to work with them. Are you going to be teaching more like how to look at them in the natal chart or the vibration charts, or are you going to look at them more towards transits? Oh, okay.
I'm looking at both, and I'm using two famous people to show you their midpoints, because I think that they're well known, and that way we can look and see how it expresses in at least their public life. You don't get to know their private life, but you know their public life.
Right. Yeah, I do research too, so I know it's like you can only know so much. So you try to understand them from the perspective that they're at least visible, Yeah. So without giving too much away, of course, we don't want to do that. What's one takeaway that you hope people will get from the workshop that you have?
Well, that the planets in the natal chart are the beginning of everything. You have to have the natal chart in order to have harmonic charts. You just, that's a takeaway. And that the harmonic charts are an integral function of the natal chart. They express themselves through that vehicle, and I hope that is what they get from it, because the midpoints are all part of it. The midpoints are there. We don't see them readily, but they're there. And if you know what your midpoints are, then you can be watching transits to see when the midpoint gets stimulated.
That's a good point too, because literally, good point. But the idea of looking at it for transits and getting to see when something triggers that, because that can really set a lot of things off. Yeah. Wow. That's awesome.
And those aren't necessarily, the kind of midpoints that are shown with a midpoint tree or a midpoint structure. Those are always in functioning in your life. If you have a strong less than 15 minutes on a midpoint with a midpoint structure, it's part of your nature and how you express yourself. The midpoints that don't get activated are ones that don't have that third planet. But if they do have a third planet, it's a transit or a progression or a solar return planet, which is really a transit.
Right. And you've seen that working too. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. Would you say that isotraps, midpoint structures, are more powerful than a circuit or an aspect, if you will, of like something like that?
I don't know if you could qualify it like that. I think the planetary circuits are the main energy expression through the vibration. The vibration gives you the meaning, but I don't know. That's a thing, something to think about.
Yeah, it would be an interesting research project to see like what, and sometimes the aspect patterns create the midpoints too. They're in alignment as well. So yeah.
It depends on the chart. I mean, some charts just, you look at it and you wouldn't see that they have all these powerful midpoint structures sitting there until you run the listing. Then you see that it's there.
That's my 7 vibration. It looks like I just have Sun, Neptune conjunct like in 1 minute apart. So it's like they're very conjunct, but everything else looks boring until you put the midpoints in. You're like, oh my gosh, what is going on? It's like my whole 7 vibe lights up, and I'm like, yep, that's me. I have a whole 7 vibe life too. Outside of the extroverted part of me, which is what you're seeing now. So it's kind of cool. Yeah. Yeah, and I think Linda was the one that actually pointed that out to me like ages ago. So I was like, that makes sense. Yep.
Yeah, and the isotraps are very special. I don't think that they are stronger than circuits necessarily, but I think that their energy is pervasive. It's there. It's like a steady progression of push and creativity. I don't know the exact words to put to it actually, but the isotraps are very powerful as well, just not in an obvious way.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes it's like you said, another layer underneath the hood, one more, maybe other than just the face clock, the clock face, and just going, you just keep digging. So I agree with that. I think midpoints like tell a story underneath the story a bit. So that makes sense.
And one of the ideas in vibrational astrology that I really value is that conjunctions and oppositions, but mostly conjunctions, are the most powerful aspects that are in the chart. And that what you're looking at in vibrational charts is the conjunctions. And when you're looking at midpoint structures, it actually expresses in a vibration. So it's not, if you're in the natal chart and you have a whole bunch of, let's say you have 3 or 4 that are less than 15 minutes of midpoints, those midpoints expressed in a vibration. And when you know the vibration, it makes so much sense to know how that person is expressing that midpoint. It's not just the natal chart that it's being expressed through, it's the vibrational chart as well.
Yeah, exactly. And then you get to pin down who they are by looking at that vibration, or their underlying motivation and movement from that. So that's a really good point too. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Jean, for joining me today. It's been such a joy to chat with you. I know that the audience is going to love digging into this midpoint magic with you. I'm excited to be there.
That.
Yeah.
I should have named my talk Midpoint Magic.
I know. I thought that was super cute. Yeah, the idea of midpoint magic. So, but that's wonderful. So thank you for joining me today. And thank you for everybody that's watching. And of course, we'll see you all at the Fractal Cosmos Conference. All right.
Definitely.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Darlene. Bye-bye.
You're welcome. Bye.